This week, a president and a former president were traveling abroad, presenting Brazil to the world. Jair Bolsonaro went to the Middle East, and Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva went to Europe. Bolsonaro returned empty-handed, giving no indication that his meeting with the Arab leaders will bring any good news to Brazil's faltering economy. What's more, he insisted when he was asked about global agreements on climate change being discussed at the COP26 meetings that the international media lied about the deforestation in Brazil. The rainforest can't catch on fire, he explained. Too much rainfall. You could pour gasoline on it and it wouldn't burn, he insisted. However, as soon as COP26 was over, the Brazilian government released information indicating that Brazil had experienced the greatest Brazilian deforestation in 15 years, a fact that the Bolsonaro government had hid from the World Committee during the meetings. This last year alone, there was a 21.9% increase in deforestation. On the other hand, Lula met with the likes of the future Chancellor of Germany, President Macron of France, trade union leaders, and many other important European politicians. He was warmly received wherever he went. Now, as you will recall, Bolsonaro had a disastrous visit to Rome for the G20 meeting, carrying out no visible positive diplomacy and tarnishing Brazil's image at the same time. Lula's European tour reminded many journalists of the successful international diplomacy during his presidency, when he traveled to Europe, the United States, Asia, Africa, and Latin America, whereas under Bolsonaro, Brazil has become a pariah. So what does this mean for the presidential electoral race? Well, on Sunday, the Party of Brazilian Social Democracy had its internal process for the selection of a presidential candidate, pitting São Paulo Governor João Doria against Eduardo Leite, the governor of the southernmost state of Rio Grande do Sul. As this edition of Brazil Unfiltered is being taped, it seems that the internal election process is in trouble. Evidently, the application designed for party members to vote didn't work properly, causing the supporters of Leite to call on the party to postpone the vote. Could it be that they fear losing the contest? At any rate, in the presidential elections held in 89, 94, 98, 2002, 06, 10, and 14, the contest was between the Party of Brazilian Social Democracy, known in Brazil as the PSDB, and the PT, the Workers' Party. Then in 2018, Bolsonaro's candidacy took off, replacing the PSDB as the main competitor against the left and shifting that bloc from the center-right to the far right. Bolsonaro captured 55% of the votes to 45% for Fernando Haddad, the former Minister of Education and the mayor of the city of São Paulo. And in that race, the PSD candidate, Geraldo Alckmin, got only 4.8% of the vote. Now it seems which either candidate of the PSDB wins the party's nomination, it is unlikely to grow in popular support. And this is causing a media frenzy among the mainstream press that supported Bolsonaro against Haddad and in the last year has distanced themselves from the current president, calling for an alternative candidate, or as they call it, a terceira via, the third way. Even when the former judge and Minister of Justice, Sergio Moro, jumped into the presidential race this last week, the mainstream press was lukewarm about his candidacy. And to remind our listeners, Moro, as the head of the Lava Jato car wash investigation, rushed through a conviction of Lula so he would be ineligible to be a candidate in the 2018 election and got awarded for doing so by becoming Minister of Justice. Moro has now joined a political party named Podemos, or We Can, after pledging for years not to be interested in politics. So much for promises. This week, the cover of Veja, the Brazilian version of Time magazine, published a cover with the images of Bolsonaro, Lula, and Moro, as if they were on an electronic voting machine, with a big red rejection button and the words, no, 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 and no. The argument, the voters reject all of the presidential candidates, including the alleged anti-corruption candidate, Sergio Moro. The cover story article, however, was an exercise in problematic journalism, to say the least. Veja announced that Bolsonaro indeed has 67% disapproval rate, followed by Sergio Moro at 61%, São Paulo Governor João Doria with 58%, and left-wing turned right-wing critic of the Workers' Party, Ciro Gomes, with a 53% rejection rate. Given Brazil's electoral system, in which you need a majority to be elected rather than a plurality, in a crowded race, it seems that both the far-right candidacy of Bolsonaro and the so-called third-way alternatives are doomed to failure. You can't win if a majority is against you. But then what about Lula? His rejection rate is 39%, which means that 61% of the population don't reject him. That's more than enough to win in the first round of the election if they were held today. Then why include Lula on the cover of the magazine, stating that Lula is rejected by the public? Because in reality, he is rejected by the editors of Veja and many other sectors of the elite, but evidently not by the majority of the people of Brazil. But the mainstream press, which is largely quite conservative, insists on the narrative that Bolsonaro and Lula have polarized the country and we need a middle-of-the-road alternative. For those of you who followed debates in the United States, including those this last week in Congress, something similar was going on. The Republicans refused to support Joe Biden's Build Back Better human infrastructure and environmental protection plan. And Kevin McCarthy, the minority leader in the House of Representatives, addressed the Congress arguing that Biden's program was a radical Marxist and socialist effort to destroy America. In other words, Joe Biden, who has always been a moderate, middle-of-the-road liberal Democrat, has somehow morphed into a radical Marxist socialist. Basically, that is what the mainstream press is arguing in Brazil. Bolsonaro and Lula are too radical. Bolsonaro on the far right and Lula on the far left, so we need to support someone in the middle. It's like saying, don't support Trump, don't support Biden, support someone who no one has ever heard of or no one is really interested in for president. That wouldn't go very far in the United States, and it's not going to go very far in Brazil. But the mainstream press is getting desperate. And so is Bolsonaro, who is still a man without a party, as the Liberal Party decided to step back from offering him a landing station. He remains in political orbit without a party from which to run his 2022 presidential campaign. Meanwhile, this week we learned about 3 new ways that Bolsonaro is trying to reshape Brazil that affects the way the country deals with its history. The first was in the development of questions for the National College Entrance Exam to get into public universities that is known as ENEM. It seems that Bolsonaro wanted to purge any questions from the exam that referred to the 21 years of military rule, that is from 1964 to 85, when the country lived under a dictatorship. Now remember, when Bolsonaro voted on the floor of the Chamber of Deputies to impeach Dilma Rousseff, he cast his vote in the name of Colonel Ustra, who oversaw the torture of Rousseff when she was a participant in the armed struggle. He also dedicated his vote to the, quote, revolution of 1964, which is the way the 4-star generals who ruled the country for more than 2 decades called the coup d'etat and the subsequent 21 years of military rule. So Bolsonaro's representatives forced the people preparing the exams to purge any negative references to the dictatorship. He has also appointed a new director to the National Archive who has no experience working with archives or any visible understanding of what the historical profession is all about. The lawyer, Ricardo Borda d'Água Braga, will be responsible for overseeing the preservation of 1.7 million photos, sound recordings, 34 miles of documents, and many other valuable registers of Brazilian history collected since 1838. His training? Until last year, he was the owner of a training and security company. Does that mean he will guarantee that no one steals any documents from the National Archive? And finally, on the week surrounding November 20th, the day of Black consciousness and the day that Zumbi dos Palmares was executed by the Portuguese in 1695, the Public Defender's Office and the Federal Prosecution Office forced the Bolsonaro government to take over the protection and restoration of the archaeological remains of the Valongo wharfs in Rio de Janeiro. Between 1811 and the final abolition of the international slave trade in 1851, over 1 million enslaved Africans passed through this wharf to go on to forced labor in the coffee plantations of Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, and Minas Gerais. Twice, the Bolsonaro government refused to care for this location, which is a World Heritage Site. Bolsonaro, like many in the United States critical of the 1619 project, simply refused to address the history and legacy of slavery in Brazil. And if you're interested in learning more about that topic, I want to encourage you to listen to my podcast or view my YouTube episode on Zumbi dos Palmares and the legacies of slavery in Brazil. So those are the highlights for this week's Brazilian news update. I hope you're enjoying the program. Brazil Unfiltered is 100% independent, free, and available to all. If you can, please support us at patreon.com/Brazil Unfiltered. The link is on the description below. I have hardworking producers who need to get compensated for their dedicated efforts. Also, don't forget to like the video, and if you have not yet subscribed, please do so. Have a great week. Until next time, até a próxima.